The gravel crunched under my tires as I pulled into the parking lot of Willow Creek Elementary, the only school for miles in this patch of rural nowhere. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel, and I forced myself to take a deep breath before stepping out into the crisp morning air. The building looked ordinary enough: red brick, faded playground, a flag snapping in the wind. But something about the silence felt heavier than it should. I reminded myself that this job was my chance. After months of applications and interviews, I finally had a classroom of my own. I needed this to work. I needed to prove to myself, and everyone back home, that I could do this. Inside, the halls smelled faintly of bleach and old paper. My footsteps echoed as I made my way to the main office, where a secretary with tired eyes handed me a stack of forms and a lanyard. "You're the new teacher, right?" she asked, her voice flat. I nodded, and she gave me a look I couldn't quite read: pity, maybe, or warning. "Staff room's down the hall. They're waiting for you." As I walked, I passed a cluster of teachers whispering by the water fountain. Their conversation stopped as I approached, and one of them, a man with a coffee-stained tie, offered a tight smile. "Big night tonight," he said, almost to himself. Another teacher, a woman with silver hair, just shook her head and muttered, "Hope you read the list." I tried to laugh it off, but my nerves prickled. What list? What was happening tonight? I pushed open the staff room door, expecting the usual clutter of mugs and stale donuts. Instead, I found a group of teachers huddled around a bulletin board. Taped to the center was a sheet of paper, the words "Rules for Parent-Teacher Night" scrawled across the top in thick black marker. The room fell silent as I stepped inside, and every eye turned to me. I felt the weight of their stares, and for the first time, I wondered if I'd made a mistake coming here. I tried to steady my breathing as I crossed the staff room, pretending not to notice how the conversation had died. The bulletin board was cluttered with the usual school notices, lunch menus, field trip forms, a faded fire drill schedule, but the sheet of paper in the center drew my eyes like a magnet. The title was written in thick, hurried strokes: "Rules for Parent-Teacher Night." Underneath, a list of 10 rules, each one stranger than the last. Lock your classroom door at 7:45 p.m. sharp. Do not let any parent in after 8:30 p.m., no matter what they say. If a parent asks about room 12, change the subject immediately. Never be alone in the hallways after 9 p.m. If you hear your name whispered from the gym, do not respond. Do not eat or drink anything offered by a parent after 8 p.m. If the lights flicker 3 times, gather in the staff room and wait. Do not look out the windows after 9:30 p.m. If you see a child in the building after 10 p.m., alert Mr. Harris. When the clock strikes 11 o'clock, leave the building together. Do not return until morning. I read the list twice, waiting for someone to laugh or roll their eyes, but the room was silent. The teachers watched me, faces tense and drawn. I tried to force a smile. Is this some kind of tradition? Like hazing for the new teacher? My voice sounded too loud in the quiet room. No one smiled. The woman with silver hair, who I'd seen in the hallway, stepped forward. "You follow the rules," she said, her voice low and steady. "All of them. No exceptions." Her eyes were sharp, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The man with the coffee-stained tie cleared his throat. "It's not a joke. You'll see tonight. Just don't ask questions. Don't try to be a hero. The rules are there for a reason." I looked around, searching for a hint of irony, but all I saw was fear. Another teacher, a young man with a nervous twitch, wouldn't meet my eyes. "Last year, someone forgot to lock their door," he muttered. "We don't talk about it. I wanted to protest, to say this was ridiculous, but something in their faces stopped me. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with secrets. I folded my arms, trying to look braver than I felt. Fine, I'll follow the rules. The silver-haired woman nodded, her expression softening just a little. Good, that's all we ask. No one explained what would happen if I broke a rule. No one had to. The silence in the room was answered enough. I glanced at the clock, suddenly aware of how slowly the hands were moving. Tonight, I realized, was going to be anything but ordinary. My first day at Willow Creek passed in a blur of introductions, lesson plans, and the constant hum of fluorescent lights. The students were polite enough, but there was a wariness in their eyes, as if they were sizing me up, waiting to see what kind of teacher I'd be. A few of the older kids whispered to each other when they thought I wasn't looking, glancing at the clock more often than seemed normal. I chalked it up to nerves about parent-teacher night, but the feeling lingered. At lunch, I tried to join a group of teachers in the staff room, but their conversation stopped as soon as I entered. They spoke in low voices about last year and the new list, but when I asked what they meant, they changed the subject to the weather. I caught snippets. She never came back, heard her name in the gym, but no one would explain. The silver-haired woman, who I learned was Mrs. Carter, gave me a sympathetic look but said nothing. The afternoon dragged on. My students grew restless, eyes flicking to the windows as the sky darkened. At dismissal, a little girl with braids tugged at my sleeve. "Don't forget to lock your door tonight, miss," she whispered, then hurried away before I could ask what she meant. By the time the last bell rang, the halls were nearly empty. I stayed behind to organize my classroom, determined to make a good impression. The sun was setting, casting long shadows through the windows. I lost track of time, only realizing how late it was when the intercom crackled to life. "All staff, please remember to secure your rooms and avoid the hallways after 7 p.m., Mr. Harris's voice echoed, oddly flat. I glanced at the clock, 6:55. I gathered my things, but as I stepped into the hallway, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, expecting to see another teacher, but the corridor was empty. The lights flickered, just once, and I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I quickened my pace, but halfway to the staff room, I heard my name, soft, almost a sigh, echoing from the direction of the gym. I froze. The rules flashed through my mind. If you hear your name whispered from the gym, do not respond. My heart hammered in my chest. I forced myself to keep walking, eyes fixed on the staff room door at the end of the hall. The whisper came again, closer this time, but I didn't look back. Just as I reached the staff room, the door opened and Mrs. Carter pulled me inside. "You shouldn't be out here," she whispered, locking the door behind us. I tried to laugh it off, but my hands were shaking. I thought I heard someone. She cut me off with a look. "Don't talk about it. Not here." The other teachers were already gathered, eyes darting to the windows as the last light faded. I sat down, trying to steady my breathing. The normalcy of the day had vanished, replaced by a tension I couldn't explain. I glanced at the list of rules on the bulletin board, suddenly wishing I'd paid more attention. The line between ordinary and strange had blurred, and I realized I was no longer sure which side I was on. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the school took on a different character. The familiar hum of the building was replaced by a tense, watchful silence. I changed into a fresh blouse in the staff restroom, trying to convince myself that tonight would be like any other parent-teacher night I'd attended. But as I stepped into the hallway, the air felt charged, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Parents began to arrive in small clusters, their footsteps echoing on the linoleum. At first, everything seemed normal: handshakes, polite smiles, the usual nervous energy. But as the minutes ticked by, I noticed oddities. A father in a faded flannel shirt stood perfectly still in the lobby, staring at the trophy case for so long it became unsettling. A mother with a too-wide smile asked the same question 3 times in a row, her voice never changing pitch. A pair of twins in matching coats clung to their mother's skirt, their eyes fixed on me, unblinking. The lights flickered again, longer this time, and the hallway seemed to stretch, the doors receding into shadow. I caught Mrs. Carter's eye as she passed by my classroom. She paused, her hand on my shoulder. "Remember the rules," she whispered, her grip firmer than I expected. "Especially tonight. Don't let anyone in after 8:30. And if you hear your name, don't answer." I nodded, trying to hide my unease. The clock on my wall ticked towards 7:30. I locked my classroom door as instructed, feeling a strange sense of relief as the bolt slid into place. The first parent knocked, and I forced a smile as I opened the door. She sat across from me, her hands folded neatly in her lap, but her eyes never quite met mine. She asked about her son's grades, then abruptly changed the subject to the weather, then back to grades, as if she were following a script. As the evening wore on, the oddities multiplied. A man in a suit asked about room 12, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. I remembered the rule and quickly changed the subject, my heart pounding. Another parent offered me a homemade cookie, insisting I try one. I declined, recalling the warning about food and drink. Her smile faded, and she left without another word. The hallways outside my classroom grew quieter, the usual bustle replaced by an uneasy stillness. Every so often, I heard footsteps pause outside my door, then move on. The clock crept toward 8:30, and I found myself glancing at it every few seconds, counting down the minutes. At 8:29, a latecomer knocked, pleading to be let in. I hesitated, the urge to be helpful warring with the memory of the rules. I shook my head, mouthing, "I'm sorry," through the glass. The parent's face twisted into something I couldn't quite name before they turned and disappeared down the hall. By 9, the building felt like a different world. The lights flickered again, and the shadows seemed to press closer. I sat at my desk, hands clenched, listening to the silence. The anticipation that had filled me earlier was gone, replaced by a cold, crawling anxiety. I realized I was waiting, not for my parents, but for something else. Something I couldn't name, but that I knew was coming. The clock on my classroom wall ticked past 9, the hands moving with agonizing slowness. I sat at my desk, reviewing the list of rules for the 100th time, the words blurring together. The hallway outside was silent except for the occasional creak of the building settling. I tried to focus on my notes, but my mind kept drifting to the strange faces, the flickering lights, the way the air seemed to hum with tension. A sudden knock at my door made me jump. I checked the time, 9:07 p.m. I hesitated, remembering the rule about not being alone in the hallways after 9. I peered through the glass and saw Mr. Larkin, the science teacher, standing with a parent I recognized from earlier. The parent, a tall man with a gray beard and a heavy coat, was speaking in low, urgent tones. Mr. Larkin looked tired, his shoulders slumped, but he nodded and opened his classroom door, gesturing for the parent to follow. I watched as they disappeared into his room, the door closing softly behind them. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that maybe the rules were just a tradition, a way to spook the new teachers. But a knot of dread tightened in my stomach. Minutes passed. The hallway remained empty. Then, from inside Mr. Larkin's classroom, I heard raised voices. The parents' tone grew sharp, insistent, and I caught the words "Room 12" repeated over and over. I remembered the rule: if a parent asks about Room 12, change the subject immediately. I stood, torn between the urge to help and the warning echoing in my mind. Suddenly, the lights in the hallway flickered violently, plunging the corridor into darkness for a heartbeat before snapping back on. I heard a crash from Mr. Larkin's room, followed by a sound I can only describe as a wet, tearing noise. My heart pounded as I crept closer, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. The door to Mr. Larkin's classroom was ajar. I pushed it open, my breath catching in my throat. The room was empty except for the parent, who stood in the center, his back to me. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and something metallic. The parent turned slowly, and I saw that his eyes were completely black, his mouth stretched into an unnatural grin. His voice was layered, as if several people were speaking at once. He broke the rule. The voices said in unison. He answered after an hour. He told me about Room 12. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a chair. The parent, or whatever he was, took a step toward me, but then stopped, head cocked as if listening to something only he could hear. "Not your turn," he whispered, and then he was gone, vanishing as if he'd never been there at all. I looked around the room, searching for any sign of Mr. Larkin. His papers were scattered across the floor, his coffee mug shattered, but there was no trace of him. Not a sound, not a footprint, nothing. It was as if he'd been erased. I backed out of the classroom, my hands shaking. The hallway was empty, the silence pressing in on me from all sides. I hurried back to my own room, locking the door behind me and sliding to the floor. My mind raced, replaying what I'd seen. The rules weren't a joke. They weren't a tradition. They were a warning. I pressed my back against the door, listening to the building settle, the distant hum of the lights. I thought of Mrs. Carter's words, the fear in her eyes, the way the other teachers had avoided my questions. I understand now. The rules were the only thing keeping us safe. I clung to them, desperate for the illusion of control, knowing that one mistake could mean the end. From that moment on, I didn't question the rules. I followed them to the letter, my doubt replaced by a cold, unyielding fear. The hours after Mr. Larkin vanished stretched into a waking nightmare. I sat on the floor of my locked classroom, clutching the list of rules, my mind racing through every line, every warning. The building was no longer just a school. It was a labyrinth of threats, each rule a fragile thread keeping me from whatever waited in the dark. I forced myself to stand, checking the lock on my door for the third time. My phone buzzed with a message from Mrs. Carter. "Stay in your room. Don't answer knocks. If you need help, text me." I typed back a shaky, "Okay," my fingers trembling. A few minutes later, footsteps echoed in the hallway. I held my breath, peering through the narrow window. A parent I'd seen earlier, the woman with the too wide smile, was walking slowly past the doors, her head turning from side to side. She stopped at my classroom, pressed her face to the glass, and smiled. Her eyes were wrong, too dark, too deep. She knocked, softly at first, then harder. "Miss?" I forgot to ask about my daughter's grades. "Could you let me in?" Her voice was syrupy, but underneath I heard something else, a rasping echo that made my skin crawl. I backed away, remembering the rule. Do not let any parent in after 8:30 p.m., no matter what they say. The knocking grew more frantic, then stopped. I waited, heart pounding, until her footsteps faded. I slumped against the wall, relief flooding through me. But the reprieve was short-lived. The lights flickered again, 3 times in quick succession. My breath caught. Rule 7. If the lights flicker 3 times, gather in the staff room and wait. I hesitated, torn between the safety of my locked door and the warning on the list. My phone buzzed again. Mrs. Carter, this time with a single word. Now. I grabbed my bag and slipped into the hallway, moving quickly but quietly. The corridor was empty, but the air felt thick, charged with static. As I hurried toward the staff room, I heard a child's laughter echo from the far end of the hall. I froze. Rule 9. If you see a child in the building after 10 p.m., alert Mr. Harris. I checked my watch, 9:58. I kept moving, refusing to look back. The staff room was already half full when I arrived. Mrs. Carter, the nervous young teacher, and 2 others sat in a tight circle, eyes wide and faces pale. The door closed behind me with a soft click. "Where's Mr. Larkin?" someone whispered. No one answered. We waited in silence. The only sound the hum of the vending machine and the distant creaks of the building. The lights outside the staff room flickered again, and the shadows seemed to press closer to the glass. I stared at the list of rules pinned to the bulletin board, mouthing each one like a prayer. Suddenly, the intercom crackled to life. "Miss Taylor, please report to room 12." The voice was flat, mechanical, but it sent a jolt of terror through me. I looked at Mrs. Carter, who shook her head. "Don't go," she whispered. "No matter what you hear." The intercom repeated the message, louder this time. I pressed my hands over my ears, willing it to stop. The other teachers huddled closer, their fear contagious. The minutes crawled by. Someone tried to call the office, but the line was dead. A loud bang echoed from the hallway, followed by the sound of running footsteps. The young teacher, eyes wild, bolted for the door. "My wife, she's here. She needs me," he cried, fumbling with the lock. Mrs. Carter tried to stop him, but he wrenched the door open and disappeared into the darkness. The door swung shut behind him, and the silence returned. We waited, barely breathing, until the lights steadied and the intercom fell silent. Mrs. Carter checked her watch. "We have to leave together at 11, she whispered. "That's the last rule. We stick together, no matter what." The next hour was a blur of tension and whispered prayers. Shadows moved outside the staff room, sometimes pausing at the door. Once, I heard my own name whispered from the direction of the gym, soft and pleading. I squeezed my eyes shut, refusing to answer. The rules were all I had. At 10:45, the lights flickered one last time. Mrs. Carter stood, gathering us with a nod. "It's almost time. Stay close. Don't look out the windows. Don't stop for anyone." We moved as a group, hearts pounding, every sense on high alert. The hallways were darker than before, the air colder. As we passed the gym, I heard footsteps behind us, but I didn't look back. We reached the main entrance just as the clock struck 11. Mrs. Carter counted us, one missing. She shook her head, tears in her eyes, but said nothing. Together, we stepped out into the night, the doors closing behind us with a final, echoing thud. Outside, the world felt normal again. The stars were bright, the air crisp. But I knew nothing would ever feel normal after tonight. The rules had saved me, but at a cost. I glanced back at the darkened school. The list of rules burned into my memory. I had survived, but I knew the night was not truly over. The cold air outside the school was sharp, but it felt like a relief after the suffocating tension of the hallways. I stood with Mrs. Carter and the remaining teachers in the parking lot, our breaths clouding in the moonlight. For a moment, I thought it was over. We had made it out together, just as the last rule demanded. But as I looked back at the building, I realized something was wrong. The front doors, which should have been locked behind us, stood slightly ajar. A faint, unnatural glow pulsed from within, and the air vibrated with a low, humming sound that set my teeth on edge. Mrs. Carter's face went pale. "No," she whispered. "We're not done. Not yet." She turned to me, her eyes wide with fear. "The last rule, when the clock strikes 11 o'clock, leave the building together. Do not return until morning. We all have to be out. All of us." I looked around. Someone was missing. The young teacher who had run after his wife, he hadn't made it out. My heart pounded as I realized what this meant. The rule wasn't just about leaving together. It was about making sure no one was left behind. If even one person remained inside, the rule was broken. A chill ran through me as I remembered the cryptic warning at the bottom of the list, scrawled in a different hand. "If the rules are broken, the school will not let you go." I glanced at the others, but they were frozen in fear, staring at the open doors. I knew what I had to do. Before I could talk myself out of it, I stepped forward. "I'll go back," I said, my voice shaking. "I'll find him." Mrs. Carter grabbed my arm, her grip desperate. "Don't. You don't know what's in there now." But I shook her off. "If we don't all leave, none of us are safe." I crossed the parking lot, each step heavier than the last. The school loomed before me, its windows dark except for that pulsing glow. As I pushed open the doors, the temperature dropped, and the air grew thick and heavy. The hallways were unrecognizable, longer, twisted, the walls pulsing as if alive. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, and the hum grew louder, resolving into a chorus of whispers. My name, over and over, in voices I recognized and some I didn't. I forced myself to move forward, clutching the list of rules like a talisman. The building seemed to shift around me, doors appearing and disappearing, the floor slanting beneath my feet. I called out for the young teacher, my voice swallowed by the whispers. "I'm here. We have to leave together." A door at the end of the hall creaked open, spilling that sickly light into the corridor. I moved toward it, every instinct screaming at me to run. Inside, the young teacher stood in the center of the room, his back to me. He was staring at the far wall, where a shadowy figure loomed, tall, faceless, its form shifting and writhing like smoke. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and something older, something rotten. The figure turned toward me, and I felt its gaze, cold and endless, settle on my soul. It spoke without words, its meaning pressing into my mind. "You broke the rule. You let him stay. Now you all belong to me." I remembered the final rule, leave together, do not return. But I was here now, and the only way out was to bring him with me. I reached for the young teacher, grabbing his arm. His skin was ice cold, his eyes glazed. "We have to go," I whispered now. The shadow lashed out, a tendril of darkness whipping toward us. I shoved the teacher toward the door, dodging the attack by inches. The hallway twisted, the walls closing in, but I kept moving, dragging him behind me. The whispers grew frantic, angry, the building itself fighting to keep us inside. We stumbled through the corridors, the exit always just out of reach. I remembered the rules. Don't look out the windows. Don't answer the whispers. Don't eat or drink. I kept my eyes forward, ignoring the voices that called my name, the faces that appeared in the glass. The teacher stumbled, nearly falling, but I pulled him up, refusing to let go. At last, the front doors appeared before us, the glow fading as we approached. I could see Mrs. Carter and the others outside, their faces pale with fear and hope. I pushed the teacher through the doors, feeling the resistance of the building, the weight of the shadow pressing down on me. For a moment, I thought I wouldn't make it. The darkness wrapped around my ankles, cold and suffocating. I remembered the last line of the rules: do not return until morning. I screamed, forcing myself forward, and the darkness snapped, releasing me. I stumbled out into the night, collapsing on the pavement as the doors slammed shut behind me. The glow vanished. The hum faded. The school was silent once more. Mrs. Carter knelt beside me, her hands shaking. "You did it," she whispered. "You brought him back. We're safe, for now." I looked at the building, the list of rules clutched in my fist. I had survived, but I knew the school would be waiting, patient and hungry, for the next time the rules were tested. The first rays of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the school in pale gold. The oppressive weight that had pressed on us all night seemed to lift, replaced by a brittle, exhausted silence. We huddled together in the parking lot, shivering in the early morning chill, each of us counting the survivors. The young teacher I dragged from the building sat on the curb, staring at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. Mrs. Carter wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, her eyes red but grateful. As the sun rose higher, the school looked almost ordinary again, just bricks and windows, the playground empty and still. But I knew better. I could still feel the echo of that darkness, the way the building had shifted and breathed, the voices that had called my name. Mrs. Carter sat beside me, her voice low. "The rules weren't always posted," she said. "Years ago, teachers just disappeared. Or worse, someone started writing down what worked, what kept us safe. Every year, the list grows. Every year, the school tests us, looking for a weakness." I glanced at the list, now crumpled and stained in my hand. "What happens if we stop following them?" She shook her head. "No one knows. No one's ever survived breaking more than one or two. The school, it remembers. It punishes. And it never forgives." I looked at the other teachers, their faces drawn and haunted. Some had been here for decades, others only a year or two. All of us were bound by the same unspoken pact: follow the rules, survive the night, and never speak of what really happens here. As the buses arrived and the first students trickled in, the staff forced smiles, pretending nothing was wrong. But I saw the way they glanced at the clock, the way they avoided certain hallways, the way they flinched at the sound of the intercom. I understand now. Parent-teacher night was never about the parents. It was a test, a ritual, a bargain struck with something old and hungry that lived within these walls. And as I watched the sun climb higher, I knew the rules would be waiting for me next year, and every year after, as long as I dared to stay. I sit at my desk as the sun sets, the school once again humming with the ordinary sounds of children and lessons. The list of rules is tucked in my drawer, its edges worn from anxious hands. I survived parent-teacher night, but the cost lingers in every shadow, every echo in the halls. I wonder if I'll have the strength to face it again next year, or if the school will finally claim me as it has so many before. Sometimes, I catch Mrs. Carter watching me with a knowing sadness, as if she's already seen my fate. The new teacher starts next week. I'll be the one to hand them the list, to warn them in hushed tones, to hope they listen. As the clock ticks toward another night, I realize the rules aren't just for survival, they're a promise. And the school is always waiting to be tested again.